Why are almost 10% of babies going to the NICU nationwide? That's the newborn intensive care unit. Why? That's insane to think that way. Why are a third of women getting induced? Why are more than a third of women getting sectioned? What happened to nature's design in less than 50 years? In 1970, the C-section rate in the United States was 5%. Now it's 33%, and the rate of cerebral palsy has not diminished. The whole idea of fetal monitoring and doing C-section was to improve outcomes. Well, what outcomes are we improving? None.
You're listening to Biohacking with Brittany. I'm Brittany Ford, holistic nutritionist, wellness expert, and mama. This podcast is your space to explore the science, strategies, and soul of optimizing your health through every stage of life. Let's get into it. Welcome. Thank you for tuning into this episode with Dr. Stuart Fischbein. This is so exciting. I actually reached out to Dr. Stu when I was pregnant, and I was facing a lot of confusion and pressure and guilt and shame from the medical system when I found out my baby was breech, and I wasn't sure how to kind of move forward. And we do definitely talk about this on the podcast today about what to do when you have to advocate for yourself so much in those situations, when you can no longer rely on your healthcare providers as much as you'd like, and who to turn to and how to know kind of the best decisions to make for yourself in those moments, which can be very, very hard. Dr. Stu is a board-certified OBGYN. He is outspoken advocate for instinctual autonomous birth. He has over 35 years of experience in home births, in breech births, and working alongside midwives, which is really cool. He has worked both in hospitals and in home births, and is also the co-host of the Birthing Instincts podcast, and teaches globally to preserve the disappearing art of vaginal breech and twin deliveries, which was so interesting to dive into. We talked about twins. We talked about VBACs, which is a vaginal birth after cesarean. We talked about my C-section birth. We talked about if I have twins. All of these types of really can be complex topics. So I really suggest, if you're listening to this and you are pregnant or you are on your fertility journey, seriously listen to the Birthing Instincts podcast. It was one of my go-to resources when I was pregnant. I felt so aligned with their values and everything that they stood for, and I really felt heard and seen. And it was one of the few places online that, I could actually turn to. And Dr. Stu actually does answer everyone's DMs and emails. So I straight up cold messaged him, and I was like, hey, these are all my options. My midwife won't do a home birth because he's breech. Like, all of this stuff happened. What should I do? He gave me his 2 cents, and it was really helpful in the moment. So if you have any questions, message them, reach out to them, listen to their podcast. It's one of my favorites. And who knows? Maybe Dr. Stu will be involved in the next birth of my baby. That would be absolutely incredible if or when I get pregnant again. And it would be awesome to have somebody who's so experienced and has such similar values to myself. He also talks so much about the research and the data behind what we're seeing in childbirth today in the hospitals. Wild statistics that are really eye-opening that I think every woman on a fertility and pregnancy journey really does need to hear. So stay tuned for all of that. Before I dive in, a shout out to Bioptimizers. They have the best magnesium in the world, in my opinion, and it has all 7 forms of magnesium in it. I took this during my entire pregnancy. I actually took it during fertility and postpartum. And it was a huge, huge help for me for calming my nervous system, helping with pain, like back pain when I was pregnant, helping with stress and anxiety and things like that, because magnesium is actually involved in so many different roles in the body. It's actually involved in over 300 different processes. And most people are depleted in magnesium due to the quality of our food and the quality of our soil today. So check out Bioptimizers Magnesium. You can use my discount code for 15% off. That's Biohacking Brittany. And I'll link everything in the show notes for you so you can find it super easily. Same with all of the resources from today's episode. You can definitely check everything out at biohackingbrittany.com or message me on Instagram at biohackingbrittany. I answer everybody as well. We have a little community over there. You can join my broadcast channel. It's called Where Women Optimize. We talk a lot about optimal health, and I share like articles that I find interesting or podcast episodes or anything kind of like that. So enjoy this episode, and I will catch you soon for another one. Today, I am so excited to be talking with Dr. Stuart Fischbein. He is someone who I have looked up to for so long. Your Birthing Instincts podcast actually saved me last year when I was going through the last trimester of my pregnancy and then my birth, which ended up being breech and a C-section, which we can get into. But really what I felt like when I had no resources and not a lot of people to turn to who had the same values as me, your podcast was there. So I just want to shout you out because that meant so much to me. And I'm just forever grateful for the content that you produce.
Thank you for saying that. And thank you for having me on your podcast because I always love reaching an audience that I might not otherwise encounter.
Yeah.
What I've learned over the years is that most of what modern obstetrics does is wrong. And I'm not going to couch my words today. I'm going to be very blunt when we talk about certain things. One of the things we'll talk about as we get along is how do I know that? Why can Stuart Fischbein make that statement? And I can make that statement because for over the last 50 years, all we've done is created new interventions, new machinery, new technology, new tests, new guidelines, new protocols, all that stuff. And the measure of how those things work should be outcomes. And if what the medicalized birth model, including the American College of OBGYN and the American Academy of Pediatrics and the hospitals and all those things was doing was good, then we should see a commensurate improvement in outcomes. And we're not. Pretty much by every standard, everything has gotten worse in the last 50 years. And if it hasn't gotten worse, it hasn't gotten better at least. And despite rising C-section rates, rising induction rates, rising use of technology, rising use of ultrasound, rising use of color flow Doppler, rising use of Pitocin, rising use of Cytotec, fetal monitoring, all these things that have been done over the last 50 years with the so-called purpose of improving outcomes have not improved outcomes. So why are we doing them? And the answer to that is quite simple. Medicalized birth looks at pregnancy as an illness or disease. Something needs to be treated and managed. And when you have that as the background, that's the prism by which they see all pregnant women. And by more testing and more interventions and more things they do, they can generate more revenue. There's this innate conflict of interest in the way our system is set up. And that implies that everybody in it is complicit. And I don't think that that's true. Some of them are pawns. Some of them are just stuck in the system because they have large medical school debt and they just get a job and they work a shift and they work for a company and they can't individualize their care because they have to follow the protocol of the company, as opposed to more than 50 years ago when almost all doctors were independent. And I'm not saying that they weren't egomaniacs and sometimes obnoxious, but they made decisions that they could make for individualizing their care for each individual patient. Everybody talks about following guidelines. This is it diminishes our liability by following guidelines. Well, the first guideline from the American College of OBGYN didn't come out until the 1950s or 60s. Maybe it was even 71. It was not that long ago. How did we do it before we had any guidelines? How did women give birth without a guideline? So when I say things like what they're doing is wrong, I can back it up just by looking at the rising rates of intervention and the poorer outcomes for our babies, the more chronic illnesses for babies. The rate of NICU admission in the last 15 years has doubled. Or do we really think that that's the case? The Maternal Fetal Medicine Society has raised the the diagnosis of intrauterine growth restriction to 10%. So any baby that's under the 10th percentile is now labeled IUGR. Do we really believe that 10% of babies in the United States are growth restricted? Really? But it certainly creates a lot of business and revenue for the maternal fetal medicine doctors. The C-section rate is now over 33%. Do we really believe that 1 out of every 3 women in our country can't deliver their baby as nature designed? And that's not to say that we're not doing better than other countries like South Africa or Brazil or Armenia, where the C-section rates are 70+%. That's crazy, and yet that's considered the norm. And the people that institute the policies that do that are considered the experts. Experts in what? All right, I got that off my chest. Thanks. Good morning.
Good morning. That's wild. I'm actually originally from South Africa, and my mom had 3 kids. 2 of the 3 of us were C-sections in South Africa in the 90s. And now I've had a C-section. And so it's kind of everywhere around me. And I hear what you're saying, and I understand, obviously, as now a new mom and somebody in the health world. And I guess my question is, understanding this state that we're in with our healthcare system, if you're pregnant today in this world, in North America, how the heck do you navigate this? Like, do you take a list of statistics and take it to your doc and be like, okay, this is what is actually happening, so I'm going to decline A, B, and C? Or how do you navigate it as the average woman who's pregnant?
Okay, that's a really good question. And the answer is you have to do the work. You cannot wait until you're pregnant and then go to the person who's been doing your pap smear for 10 years. That is not how you pick a person or a practice or a model of care. First thing you should do before you even get pregnant is to check out your community. What options are available in your community? Are there midwives in your community? Are there home birth midwives in their community? What is the hospital? Are there 2 hospitals in your community? What's the difference between the 2? What's the C-section rate? I know that's a very blunt question, but what's the C-section rate in this hospital versus that hospital? Again, we can play with statistics all we want. There's the whole thing. There are lies, damn lies, and there are statistics, and so you can manipulate anything with statistics. So, but it is important. If one hospital has a 22% C-section rate, the other one has a 42% C-section rate, then the odds are better for you to go to the one with the 22% C-section rate. What also anybody that what you do when you're buying a house, most people anyway, when you buy a house, you check out the community. Okay? You check out the schools. You check out where's the Costco. Okay, you check out what's the traffic like. What's the crime rate of my community. You do all this research before you decide to buy a house there. You should do the same thing before you get pregnant. If you're thinking about getting pregnant with your partner or alone, doesn't matter. Before you even get pregnant, check out your community. If you want to go to an obstetrician, if you want to go to a medical route, or you like the guy that's been doing your pap smear for 10 years, which of course we could go off on a tangent and talk about the unnecessary doing of pap smears every year in most women. But it was a way for women to come in and get checked every year, which of course generated revenue for the obstetrical world, just like mammograms generate revenue for the radiologists, and just like vaccines generate revenue for pediatricians. I mean, again, you have to really take a deep dive into how medicine got so commercialized. But if you like this guy, then fine. Then go in and have a conversation with them and ask them simple questions like, what happens if I'm in labor and you're not on call? What happens if I go past 40 weeks?
Yeah.
Are you skilled in breech delivery? Interview the doctor. Go in, pay for it if you have to. A lot of doctors will do it for free, but they should be paid for their time. So if you want to make an appointment, consult, don't let them do anything medical to you. You're just going in there to ask questions. They don't need to take your blood pressure. They don't need to have you sign any documents. Don't sign anything. You're just going in to interview them and to find out what they're like. Do they give you the time of day? Do they seem to answer your questions with grace? Or do they roll their eyes? Or do they sort of get snippy with you? That's sort of very simple things that you need to do. Then again, as I said, you need to check out your community. And then you should also, when you're planning to get pregnant, make sure that your partner's on board and that you find what some people call a doula. Some people call them a patient advocate, but somebody that knows the ropes. It's kind of like having a general contractor for building something on your property. You have somebody that knows the guy at the permitting office in City Hall and can get things done for you, that sort of thing. So have somebody who knows your community in that way. And I would say even if you'd planned for absolutely certain to have that baby in the hospital, you should have at least one, if not two visits with a home birth midwife. See what it's like. See the difference. Explore these options. Put the effort into it that you would. We used to have this big analogy about comparing planning your pregnancy with planning your wedding. And maybe you've heard the analogy, Brittany. I don't know if you have, but maybe your listeners haven't. So briefly, when you plan your wedding, you plan everything. You pick the venue, you pick the invitations, you pick the guest list, you get to taste the cake, you pick the band, you even pick, for God's sakes, the color of the napkins. You plan everything. But when you get pregnant, you basically look at your insurance card and, okay, I got this, I got to go here. I'll go to this person, she's been doing my annuals, I'll just go to her. And we don't put any effort into it whatsoever. And yet these are the two most important events likely to occur in most women's lives, is their wedding day and the birth of all their children. And on your deathbed, you may not remember your wedding, but you'll remember the birth of your children. So you want to make it the best experience that you can. And that means you have to put a little bit of effort into it. And you should plan ahead. Now, a lot of times there's an oops. And if there's an oops and you're pregnant before you get time to do this, you've still got, that's why, fortunately, God gave us 9 months. You've got time to do the work and find out. And don't be trapped by logistics or locale. If there's a really good option in a town that's 20 miles from you, then maybe that's what you should look at. Or if you have to cross state lines to find someone who is a skilled breech provider, then do that. Because if your doctor doesn't know how to do breech, if your doctor tells you that we don't like to see people go past 40 weeks or 41 weeks or even 39 weeks in some cases, or the first thing they say to you is, Brittany, you're over 35. That's a problem, and we're going to have, your placenta could give out, and we're going to need to, and start from the very beginning planting seeds of doubt to make you anxious during your pregnancy. All they're doing is projecting their own anxiety upon you. That's not the kind of person that you really want taking care of you for 9 months, because they're going to continue to do that all along. Doctors are trained to fear birth. And then they do that, and then in the process of fearing birth, they project that anxiety to the women that they're caring for. And that's why American society is filled with stories about fear in birth, as opposed to the beautiful stories of what your body can do. Growing a baby is like breathing or digestion. It's a normal bodily function. And we don't see our doctor to make sure that we're breathing okay or that we're digesting okay. We see our doctor when we have a cough, pneumonia, colitis, rectal bleeding. Then you go in and see your doctor, but you don't see your doctor for normal digestion of last night's dinner. And it's the same thing with pregnancy. Pregnancy itself is a normal function of the body. The body knows exactly what to do, and it's miraculous to conceive a baby, to grow a baby, to body to know it's ripe now, and to go into labor and to be able to do all the maneuvers and all the rotations and all the contractions and all the things that you need, and the body knows how to do that. And when something goes awry, having a trained person, whether it's a doula or an advocate or a home birth midwife, they can recognize things from long before things go sour most of the time. And then that's where a hospital has great value. But a hospital has great value for maybe 10 to 15% of pregnant women. And I'm not talking about the ones who just choose to do it. If you are given information and you choose to do it at a hospital, that's great. And you should have that choice. It should never be something anyone should mock or feel guilty for. But if you choose to do the opposite, you shouldn't be mocked or feel guilty for staying home either, because it is a normal bodily function. It can, and when you leave it alone, when you don't mess with Mother Nature, when you don't immobilize a woman, starve a woman, hyperstimulate her with Pitocin, numb her with an epidural, the likelihood that you're going to see rapid deterioration of that baby's heart rate and that fetal status is so rare. And I have a unique perspective because I did work for 28 years in the hospital setting. And then for a little over 12 years, I left the hospital and I did home birthing with midwives. So I have that unique view on things because most of my obstetrical colleagues have never been to a home birth. It actually freaks them out a little bit. And most of home birth midwives have never really sat through a long and drawn out induction in the hospital and know what's going on. And we should do something to break the silos, and we should have, if we're working for the betterment of our women that we're caring for, the betterment of their health, then we shouldn't be having these walls between things, and we shouldn't be picking on each other. You know, I am guilty of picking on the medical model because it deserves picking on. Partly because they don't want to change. They don't listen. And as I said early on, they don't look at their outcomes. Why are almost 10% of babies going to the NICU nationwide? That's the newborn intensive care unit. Why? Mm-hmm. That's insane to think that way. Why are a third of women getting induced? Why are more than a third of women getting sectioned? What happened to nature's design in less than 50 years? In 1970, the C-section rate in the United States was 5%. Now it's 33%, and the rate of cerebral palsy has not diminished. The whole idea of fetal monitoring and doing C-section was to improve outcomes. Well, what outcomes are we improving? None. We're improving the revenue generation of the system, but we're not improving the outcomes of the mothers and the babies that we're supposed to be caring for.
Ever snap at your partner over something small and then wonder, why did that bother me so much? Or maybe you're waking up groggy, craving sugar, breaking out, or feeling just off in your body, like your hormones are whispering or yelling that something is out of balance. If any of this sounds familiar to you, you are not alone. These are signs your body is calling out for support, and magnesium might be the missing piece. Magnesium is one of those non-negotiable minerals, especially for women. It plays a critical role in hormone regulation, stress response, blood sugar balance, sleep, and even skin and muscle function. But here's the problem. Most of us are deficient, especially during high stress seasons. Hello, modern life, motherhood, and go careers. Food alone often isn't enough. So that's why I take Magnesium Breakthrough by Bioptimizers every single night. It's the only formula I found that includes all 8 forms of magnesium, including magnesium orotate, which specifically supports metabolic and hormonal health. I love it because it helps with deep restorative sleep, stress relief, and nervous system regulation, better digestion and fewer cravings, and supports my body through every hormonal phase, from luteal to postpartum. This is your permission slip to slow down and nourish yourself at the cellular level. Go to bioptimizers.com/biohackingbritney and use code biohackingbritney for 10% off. Even better, subscribe and you'll never miss a month. Plus, you'll unlock deeper discounts and free gifts as well. Trust me, your body, your mood, and your hormones will thank you. Has there been any change in the fatality for moms during birth or even babies with all of these interventions?
Yes, maternal mortality is up.
Is up
in our country, yeah. Well, it implies it's implicit that when you do more surgical births, you're going to end up with more maternal deaths. Wow. So, yeah, but again, it's not really a concern of theirs. Childbirth is not without its risks. So nothing I'm saying is going to. There's no there's no method to have that would have zero risk involved. Once that sperm and egg connect, and a little light comes off, and everything happens, and the mysteries and magic of of the process, there's going to be chances of things going wrong. But yes, we spend more per capita, like with our education system. It's very, very parallel. We spend more per capita on maternity care than any other country in the world, and we're like 54th in maternal or neonatal mortality. We're doing lousy. I don't know the exact number. They change all the time. You get that information from the CDC and from UNICEF and other organizations. It changes, but we should be in the top 5, shouldn't we? Really?
Yeah.
Right. And we're not.
Yeah.
So all these interventions have led to higher maternal mortality. And of course, when you have a C-section rate of 33%, that means a woman having her second baby, 33% of them are going to have to deal with the whole VBAC issue. Yeah. And the whole placenta, the abnormal placentation issue, something called placenta accreta, keeps climbing and keeps rising. So whenever you mess with nature's design, there are always going to be downstream consequences that never really get looked at because they're not part of the papers. What the papers generally look at in my profession is they look at neonatal death, neonatal morbidity, and cesarean section rate. They do not look at how's that mother doing 2 weeks later? How's breastfeeding going? How's that baby's immune system at age 5? These things are not something that's ever measured in any of these studies. Mm-hmm. So they're only looking at immediate outcomes. And sometimes they do this statistical trick called composite morbidity. And I would just tell your listeners that maybe this is a deeper dive than they want, but if you ever look at a research paper, don't do what we all do, which is to read the abstract and then maybe look at the conclusion. You got to read the body of the paper. You've got to look at the material and method section. And you've got to see how many people were in the study. You say, that sounds like a really interesting study. And then you look and there were only 12 people in the study. So does it have a real statistical significance? No. You have to dive deep into the numbers in order to make sure that a paper is legitimate. And then you actually have to look at the conflicts of interest of the authors and the institution that put the paper out. Science has unfortunately been very corrupt. It's probably been corrupted for a really long time, but it's been very clear now because of what COVID did and what the two of the most prestigious journals in the world published fraudulent articles. That's the Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine during the COVID era. They published propaganda pieces, not science. So this is a problem. Boy, did I get off track on that? I'm sorry.
Here we're talking about COVID. It's fine.
Well, but you know what? It's all intertwined. It is.
Yeah. I really resonate with a lot of what you're saying. I planned so much for my birth. I read the books and I listened to the podcast. I did everything. Very healthy, holistic pregnancy, got pregnant right away, did a preconception cleanse with my husband, all these things. At 38 weeks, I found out I was breech. And my home birth was no longer possible because the midwives don't support breech home births in this community in Canada. And then my midwife had a sudden leave of absence the week after. So I had my backup midwife who I had only had one appointment with. So then she tried to get me into the hospitals. I had basically 3 options for different hospitals that they could potentially try for me to have a vaginal breech birth. But I had to hit certain markers, if I'm remembering. Like my labor had to, what's it called? Continue. Progress. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Progress on a very specific pattern in order for them to justify it. And that was the hospital that was 1 hour away. The hospital that's down the street from me told me they would not support me at all. They wanted to plan my breech C-section at 39 weeks. And I said no. And then they said, we can't support you. So even if you came into us after spontaneous labor, we would tell you to go to the hospital that's 1 hour away. And they said there's a breach in the community and it makes them uncomfortable as the doctors. And they weren't OBGYNs, they were just general surgeons. So my point in all of this is saying is I think I did so much planning and then shit hit the roof the last 2 weeks. And then I was so pregnant trying to navigate all of these decisions, being first time mom to be and in a new community. And then all the fear mongering was insane. It's like, well, like you have to weigh the risks. Like, what if your baby like doesn't survive? And like there was all of these conversations, and it was horrendous. It was terrible. So, what do you say when like things like that happen? Of like, yeah, you can be as healthy as you can and plan, but then there's things that happen that are out of your control.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just say this. Breech, for those listening, breech birth at term, when certain criteria are met, is nearly as safe as head-down delivery at term. The Royal College of OBGYN says, and they have the best statistics in their guidelines, they say the neonatal death rate from a head-down vaginal delivery is about 1 in 1,000. And the and the breech vaginal delivery death rate for babies is about 2 in 1,000. So 1 in 500. So the risk is twice as great as a vaginal delivery, which sounds worse. But when you talk about actual risk, you're talking about a 99.8 versus a 99.9% chance of it not happening. So if you don't ascribe to doing breech delivery and you say we should section all breeches, basically you're sectioning 1,000 women to save one baby over letting 1,000 head-down babies deliver vaginally. That's insane.
Mm-hmm.
The about 3 to 4% of term pregnancies are breech. Okay. And about half of all twins, twins are about 1 in 32 now, pregnancies. So about 1.5% of all all babies half of all twins have a breech baby. So that's about 5%, maybe a little bit more of term pregnancies that will have a breech baby in it. Now, obstetricians go through 4 years of medical school, after 4 years of college, and then 4 years of residency. They put 12 years of their life in to come out as experts in all things obstetrics. They can treat cancer, they can treat pregnancy, they can treat infertility, they can treat infections, they can treat everything. But can you call yourself an expert in obstetrics if 1 out of every 20 women that walks into your office, 5%, you don't know how to take care of? Can you imagine? They don't think like I'm expressing this. No, they never thought about this. Can you imagine your cardiac surgeon saying, I don't do left descending coronary arteries. I only do right descending coronary arteries. Nobody would do that. No, I only deliver your babies vaginally breech if they're head down, but if they're butt down, which 5% of babies are, I don't know how to do that. So the fault in this lies in the fear that came along in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and was codified in 2000 by the term breech trial by a Canadian author, by the way. So it was eliminated in the training programs. And that's where my biggest pet peeve is with those that are supposedly training the next generation of obstetricians, are not training them to be able to take care of 1 out of every 20 women with an option that is quite reasonable in the literature. Now, we believe in informed consent. And if you give women honest, informed consent, some women are going to choose to have a C-section, but many would choose to have a vaginal delivery, especially if they want a second child or a third child. Because if you do a C-section to lower that small risk in the first baby, but that woman wants a second baby, you've now just increased the risk to that second baby and the mom by more than you lowered the risk by doing a C-section on the breech baby in the first place. And what if she wants a third or a fourth baby? And one of the things, Brittany, that I found when I was doing consults on breeches in Southern California, because I was one of the few providers that offered breech delivery, I would always ask them this question, and the answer I got was 100% the same. The question I would ask them was, did the doctor who told you a breech delivery by cesarean is the best choice for you ever ask you if you want more children? And the answer was universally no. They didn't. And this leads me to one of my thing that will probably be on my tombstone, which is a thing that I've said for years and years and years now, is that all that matters to the medicalized birth model is a live baby in the bassinet. And how the baby gets in the bassinet and what happens to that baby down the road, what happens to that mother, and what happens to that mother's future babies, yet unseen, is not the concern of the medical system. It might be the concern of your individual doctor, whatever else, but they don't really have a say anymore. Doctors are not individualized. I mentioned earlier, almost all doctors now are employees. They're working a shift, they're getting a salary, they have a boss. They're being told what to do. If they work for a big HMO type organization and that HMO doesn't want them to do breech delivery, it doesn't want them to let anyone go past 41 weeks, both of which are quite reasonable options, they're going to have to skew their counseling to get this woman to funnel her down a path that the administrators of the hospital want her to take, which is a violation of every tenet of medical ethics. Everything about the system that I said at the very beginning, the reason I speak harshly about them is because they purport to follow all the guidelines, like ACOG this guideline, ACOG that. ACOG has very strict guidelines about ethics. They completely ignore those. Right. So properly selected breech delivery is a beautiful thing. And the body knows what to do. And if it isn't going well, it doesn't succeed or does for the same reason that head down babies do or don't. There's a slightly greater risk of problems with the breech delivery, and that's why having somebody skilled there makes sense. But it's usually not emergent. It's usually like the same thing. Labor will stall out, or, there is something, they said they wanted you to dilate at a certain, they wanted you to move along at a certain rate. That's a little bit rigid. But the problem with that, of course, is in order to know that you're dilating at a certain rate, they have to do vaginal exams on you, which the midwifery world has taught me most of the time is unnecessary. First of all, it's very uncomfortable. Second of all, it introduces bacteria and other things into the lower uterine segment, that kind of thing. So it doesn't necessarily provide all the information, but you can't have a labor curve if you don't have points on a curve, and the points on a curve are vaginal exams. But so we wouldn't do that. We would just let the woman labor. And at some point we would say, well, we need to find out what's happening. But we didn't have to have an algorithm. But if a labor does stall with a breech, it's different than if it stalls with a head down baby. We have found that the likelihood of a more adverse outcome is increased in breech than it is with head down babies. With head down babies, and when you go from a home birth and the labor has stalled, you're very likely to go to the hospital, get an epidural, rest a little bit. They'll start some Pitocin, and maybe you'll very likely still deliver vaginally. With a breech delivery, that's probably not the wisest thing to do. The wisest thing to do is probably, if your labor stalls with a breech birth, the consensus of most of us is that a C-section probably is a reasonable choice at that point. But your baby's got a lot of benefits from that labor. It picked its own day. Got exposed to the stresses of labor, which is good for future things. It had to do some turning and reflexes, and it had to deal with you, and it was communicating with you and bonding with its mother for all those hours in labor and working together. So there are benefits to labor, and that's, again, because nature designed a system that makes sense. It wasn't stupid. There's reasons why it does everything. Nature doesn't do things for the wrong reason. Does sometimes nature turn awry? Yes. There's a line from the movie Interstellar, which I love, where she talks about nature. And she says, she's asked, is it evil? And no, it's formidable. It's awesome, but it's not evil. Even though when a lion can rip apart a gazelle. Yeah, but it's not evil. Nature doesn't do that. Nature designs things to work in a way that makes sense for that generation and future generations. Because nature's whole purpose is for us to just keep going. And every time we intervene, whether it's just planting a seed of doubt at 10 weeks telling you you're over 35, or whether it's induction, or whether it's a C-section, or anything else, or not delaying cord clamping, or taking babies away from their mothers to the NICU, all these things have downstream consequences. You may not see them. They may be very small. They may not appear for years, but they all have downstream consequences, and nobody is looking. Okay. Beat that horse died. All right. Beat that horse to death. But it all intertwines.
It does.
Right.
I mean, even with the cascade of interventions, you can see that, how that intertwines. Like one thing quickly leads to another. And then, you're dealing with a C-section or you're dealing with other issues that you might not have wanted to deal with in the first place. And like you said, I actually did wait until I went into labor, despite what everyone told me. I went into labor at 40 weeks and 3, and I labored for a while. And then we went to the hospital and we did a gentle cesarean.
Mm-hmm.
And they were actually, for a cesarean, they were actually pretty great. Like they were really open to skin, breastfeeding right away, like these different things that we tried to do, vaginal seeding, all of the things. And it was like my little bit of like silver lining waiting to go into labor, because like you said, I felt like he chose his day versus me just like cutting him out at 39 weeks and being like, okay, like I guess you're coming now. There was like a very like deep connection through doing that.
Yeah. Babies, the theory is that sort of babies and something in the placenta trigger the mom to go into labor.
Right.
And when you take a baby out, the term ripped is pejorative a little bit, but I totally get it. You said that. But when you take a baby out, it's just minding its own business, and suddenly there's a hand in there reaching in and pulling it out. The baby has never had any time to do the normal processes. Something's missing. Yeah. And again, my medicalized birth model that I trained in doesn't think there's any importance to that. They don't think there's any downside to giving aspirin. They don't think there's a downside to giving antibiotics as much as they do. There is. And everything has pros and cons. And ultimately, the decision of how to proceed, based on every tenet of medical ethics in general, from the dawn of civilization, has been that there's bodily autonomy should be determined by the woman herself, the informed woman, ideally. But even you can have uninformed consent. You can just basically say uninformed refusal. But we want to tell you why we think. I don't want to know. I just don't want to do it, and that is supposed to be enough. And the use of coercive techniques, whether they be subtle things like pitting your baby against you, like saying things like you said, you wouldn't want anything to happen to your baby, or the use of outside forces like Child Protective Services. There's a very strong statement the American College of OBGYN has against ever doing that. And yet, there's story after story after story of women that were bullied in the hospital into getting something done because the hospital was nervous. They were nervous. It was making them uncomfortable. And they threatened you. If you don't let us take your baby to the NICU, we're going to call Child Protective Services. If you don't let us give your baby vitamin K, we're going to call Child Protective. This stuff is completely unethical. And people need to know that. That's one of the things, going back to the beginning, know these rules before you go in. Read ACOG guideline number 664, and among others. But that's the key one on ethics, I think. But go in and know these things ahead of time. Have a consult with a midwife before you go see your OB, so that you can get some of this information. Listen to Brittany's podcast, everybody.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, and I think there is a lot we can do. I want to pick your brain about VBACs, because I do want to have another kid. Not anytime soon. I think there is a lot to be said about mom's body needing time to restore and replenish nutrient levels, hormones, everything like that. So, in my mind and what I've read and understand, it's a minimum of 2 years, ideally 3 years before you get pregnant again, when mom is like as healthy as she can be again. So that's kind of like my framework that I would want to wait. Regardless, I'm still going to be dealing with a VBAC situation, whether it's today or 2 years from now. What would you say? What advice would you give for women listening who are like, I want to have a holistic birth, I want to have a home birth, but I've had a C-section. How can I still make this as gentle or as natural as possible?
Okay, well, the first thing I would tell you is that because you had a C-section without labor or minimal labor for breech, your chance of having a successful vaginal delivery and a subsequent pregnancy is extremely high. Okay, you didn't, quote, fail labor. You weren't given
Right.
you weren't given a chance. All right. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that we need to look at the history of why people had C-section in the first place. And that doesn't always hold water either, because I've had women who've had extremely difficult labors and C-sections, and then the second baby that fell out in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, or the backseat of the car on the way to the hospital. So, yeah, trying to be predictive in this field is worse than, there's no DraftKings for obstetrics. People shouldn't be betting on what's going to happen, because it's a fool's errand. The thing you mentioned was about interval, about waiting 2 years. The data on that is not very good, but that's what doctors will say. And remember, many doctors and many hospital systems are not VBAC friendly or VBAC supportive. They might say, well, you can do that here, but you get the impression that they're not really supportive of you. So they're always going to be looking for reasons to imply that you're too high risk. And one of them will be if you didn't have at least 18 or 24-month interval between the delivery of the first the first baby, and the conception of the second baby. They want you to have that period of time. But what does the literature say? Literature says the risk is slightly greater if it's less than 6 months. It's still not that great, but it's slightly greater. Right? But before I got to back up. Remind me to get back there. What is the actual risk of rupture in general? Because this is what we're worried about. This is what people talk about. And if you look at multiple papers, you're going to find that the risk of the scar separating prior to delivery, the term often uses rupture. Rupture is a terrible term. It conjures up the image of a tire blowing out on a semi on the freeway, all that rubber that you see along the highway. But that's not what happens most of the time. Most of the time, the scar just separates. And only a small percentage of those end up in a catastrophe. So let's talk about that. So if you look at the literature in the world, the risk of that scar separating after one low transverse cesarean like you've had is about 1 in 200 to 1 in 333. But let's just take 1 in 200 because it's the higher number. Okay. Right. How many of those women who have that scar separate will actually have a bad outcome for them or their baby? And by bad, I mean bad. Really bad. Really bad. And if you look in the literature, it's somewhere between 5 and 16% of those moms. So let's take the higher number and let's take 16%. 16% is about 1 in 6 and a quarter, 1 in 6 and change. So let's just say 1 in 6. And we'll take the higher 1 in 200. So the actual risk to any woman prior to labor that she's going to be the one that has this really bad outcome is 1 in 6 times 1 in 200. Or 1 in 1,200, right? That is labeled high risk. And after we're done with this, I want to talk a little bit about why high risk is not a number. But that's labeled high risk. So you have about a 1 in 1,200 chance. Now, if you were to have a short interval, that's going to increase that risk by some. And I can't quote the number, but it may be by, instead of being 1 in 1,200, it might be 1 in 300. The rupture might be a little bit higher, but the risk of the baby's outcome is still going to be bad outcome is still going to be 1 in 6. So it might be 1 out of every 300 women who have an interval less than 6 months. Now, the medical community has decided that that's too high a risk, and so therefore they skew their counseling to tell you that it's riskier. And they often use relative risk. Oh, it's 3 times riskier. It's 5 times riskier. Relative risk doesn't mean anything. And when someone's counseling you, if you're listening to this podcast, ask them for the term actual risk. What is the actual risk? What do I mean by that? Well, if something happened in California last year one time, that means that the risk of that happening is 1 in 40 million. Because we have more people in California than you have in Canada. Just actually insane when you think about it.
Crazy.
And say next year it happened 10 times. So you could say that the risk of this problem happening has increased tenfold in a year. Oh my God, that's horrible. But the actual risk is still 1 in 4 million.
Right.
So that's the number that matters, not the tenfold increase in risk. You might want to start looking into why it's tenfold increase, but the actual individual, it's only 1 in 4 million. Same thing happens, and doctors will skew their counseling to get you down, funnel you down that path. So you have to ask them what the actual risk is. And most doctors, I tell you, will not know. They'll just say it's high risk. Right. So, back to the VBAC thing, where the interval is such that if you look at beyond 6 months, 6 months to 12 months, 12 months to 18 months, 18 months to 24 months and beyond, you find that the data is not significantly different. They'll still wait 2 years. They'll tell you to do that, but maybe that's not what your family wants to do. Maybe you want 10 kids. You can't wait 2 years between each kid. Can't do that. I mean, you'd be 50 years old, 60 years old by the time you finish having your kids. So you can't do that. So you have to know what the numbers really are, and you have to decide whether you want to accept those risks or not. And you can only make an informed decision when you have honest information.
Right.
And if you hear something, this is where your gut comes in. If you are told something that doesn't seem to fit well with you, look into it. Seek out a second opinion, an independent second opinion. Not necessarily Googling things. I've seen ChatGPT give bad information many times. I check stuff with them a lot, and some of the stuff they don't know. And then I get into a dialogue with them and I try to correct them. And they're actually they're far more gracious than most of my obstetrical colleagues would be, whoever that ChatGPT guy is. But seriously. So that interval is not as scary as it is. Right? Now, it is important for you to recover your body. Your body's gone through a lot, and you might be anemic, and you might, need to replenish your blood, your protein, and other things like that. So waiting 6 months, a year, it seems quite reasonable. There are experts who tell you that babies should be 4 years apart for optimal thing. I read a book once where somebody was saying that, for optimal intelligence in your kids or whatever. It's some stupid thing that they say. I don't know if that's true or not. But you should do, when you have a VBAC and you have a low transverse C-section, it's not that important to have a 2-layer closure, but they'll tell you should have a 2-layer closure when they close you. And they'll want to do things like scar thickness, a meaningless ultrasound thing that they do in the 3rd trimester of a subsequent pregnancy to see what the scar thickness is. And then that will help them to decide whether or not they want you to do a VBAC or not. These are things that are done by people who do not support VBAC.
Right.
Right? A woman deserves an opportunity to have a vaginal delivery. And there's no way to predict. VBAC rupture is unpredictable. It can occur in anybody at any time, but it is rare. And that's the thing that matters.
Can I just pause you there for a second?
Yes.
So when you say VBAC rupture, I'm picturing my body, or a female body with the scar.
Yeah.
And you're saying that it pulls away, the scar itself.
Yes.
Breaks apart.
It thins, and then it begins to separate at that area. The muscle begins to separate.
Which means the outside skin that I can see on my body right now, would start. I would actually be able to.
No, Brittany. It's only the uterine muscle. Okay. We're not talking about your skin scar or your muscle scar. We're talking about the uterine scar. Your skin scar and muscle scar that's not gonna happen. And a rupture doesn't imply that, like Alien, where baby comes out your abdomen. No.
Yeah.
Everybody pictures that, but thanks James Cameron for that. But no, it's not like that at all. It's your uterine muscle. Because scar tissue does not heal with the same elasticity as your uterine muscle. But the whole benefit of doing a low transverse C-section is that the lower part of the uterus is not the part that does most of the work to force a baby out the vagina. That's the fundal part. That's where you get into the real question of if you've had a classical C-section, which is a vertical one that goes way up to the top of the uterus. Very rare to do those kind. Those are generally done for extremely premature babies or babies in very weird positions. There's a much higher risk but again, that's a stupid term. There is a higher risk of having a uterine rupture if you have a classical C-section than a low transverse C-section. So this is just part of the history taking that goes on. And again, if you go to a hospital setting or a system that is anti-VBAC or not pro-VBAC, you're going to find the questions are skewed to funnel you toward a cesarean section.
Yeah.
They're going to want to do that. Look at for them, it's just again about getting a live baby in the bassinet. A C-section, if it's a lot easier to schedule a C-section at 7:30 on a Tuesday, be out by 8:20, be in your office by 9 o'clock, and go about your day than it is to have a woman laboring all day with a previous scar, where a hospital may have a policy that says, well, if she's laboring and she's your patient, Dr. Stu, you need to be in the hospital sitting around waiting just in case. And what doctor wants to do that? Because you know that the doctor gets paid the same for a 40-minute C-section as he does for a 14-hour labor. And the hospital makes 2 to 2.5 times more money for the C-section. So what's the hospital's incentive to push for vaginal delivery?
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when I saw the numbers on what the hospitals make with the different births, and I was like just floored by it. And like, it's just wild. It's wild. Even in Canada, it's like very similar to the States of like
it doesn't
just how much the doctor.
Yeah, it doesn't matter who's paying the bill, whether it's the government or a private insurance company. Your hospitals, the more they do, the more they get paid. This is a very simple solution. I don't see it coming because I don't know, and I don't know why. I think the insurance companies would want to do it. But insurance companies should turn around and they should pay half as much for a C-section as they pay for a vaginal delivery. You'd suddenly see breech and VBAC being very popular. And then and then you could see the hypocrisy in full display. You would, because it isn't about any of that. It's about the money. And I understand that the people that run a hospital, their duty isn't to you, Brittany. Mm-hmm. Their duty is to their board of directors and their shareholders to keep the hospital fiscally viable. And if I can make 2.5 times much money on a C-section as I can on vaginal delivery, why would I support a vaginal delivery?
Yeah.
My ethical obligation as the fiduciary, the chief financial officer of the hospital, is to the hospital, not you. There's huge conflicts of interest in the way the system is set up.
I want to ask you about twins before we wrap up. So twins run in my family. What are your thoughts on a twin situation with a VBAC?
Oh, a VBAC is not an contraindication to twins delivering vaginally, and by the way, that's even an ACOG's guideline on twins. So yeah, a VBAC is just a VBAC is just a vaginal delivery. People always lump it together with VBAC, breech, and twins as being high risk. Breech and twins require special skills. VBAC does not require a special skill.
Yeah. I was told that if you're twins right away, you're like marked as high risk pregnancy.
You are, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Rixa Fries and I put out a paper on twins, came out last December, on 100 sets of twins that came into my care for a home delivery. It's a small number. It's the biggest home birth paper ever published by a single author. But it's a small number. It doesn't reach statistical significance, but it does show you what is possible if you trust birth and you have skill and you have women who are highly motivated. You can have very, very high success rates with twins and much better experiences for them and their partner and the babies. And if the mom has other kids at home, to see the babies, to see your siblings being born at home, that changes their life trajectory as well.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, if I could, is there more about twins? Because we could talk about twins for an hour too.
Yeah, I'm just curious as well about like a home birth with twins, because I do want a home birth for my next birth. And I don't know if I'll have twins, but they are in my family. And so I think about these things and I'm like, the moment I tell somebody that I've had a C-section and I want a home birth and I have twins, I just feel like I'm going to be advocating for myself the entire pregnancy again, which I'm fine to do, but it's also just can be very exhausting. So I'm curious what all your thoughts are around that.
Well, the old saying when a guy goes to the doctor and he says, "Doctor, it hurts when I do this," and the doctor says, "Don't do this."
Yeah.
Okay. So If you have a VBAC and you're pregnant with twins, you should keep it between you and your partner and maybe a few other confidant people, and you shouldn't be telling everybody because you're right. The negativity that you're going to get isn't going to be helpful in any way, shape, or form. And you really, this is a general statement at all, but if you have a mother or a mother-in-law or an auntie or a grandma who is very anti-home birth, then she should not be down in the kitchen while you're laboring upstairs in your home birth. You do not want that energy. You can feel it even if you can't hear her. You're feeling that anxiety down there. She's banging around the dishes down in the kitchen. So that sort of thing. This is a really broad topic, but I will tell you that when twins are properly selected, and people who want to know that, they can go to the paper. It's on my website, and I'm sure it'll be in the show notes. And they can find the paper, and then they can click on it for free. It's open access. And they can read the paper. They can see what criteria we used for twins. And if they make it toward term, now term for twins in my world was about 35 weeks and on. There are some provinces and there are some states that have a 37-week rule for home birth midwives, and so they're kind of screwed by that because twins at 35 or 36 weeks are going to do just fine. And even if they don't, even if they have a little breathing problem afterwards, they can go to the hospital on their own, but the mother could still have had that beautiful home birth and have the bonding with the baby. And maybe an hour and a half later, the baby's still breathing a little bit too fast or whatever else. So they want to go take the baby to observation. You can do that. But if they go to the hospital with twins, the whole birth is going to be messed up because they medicalize it intensely. You probably will need to be an epidural. You'll probably need to be on your back. You probably will have to be monitored the whole time. You'll probably be taken to the OR for the delivery where they'll have 10 or 12 people you've never met before standing around waiting for your babies to come out. The first baby will come out. They'll immediately go up and rupture the membranes on the second baby and have you push them when you're not ready to bring the second baby out. That's how it's done. That's how I did it for 28 years. And then I began to learn, during that process, I began to learn that a lot of that stuff is just protocol. It's just nobody asks why anymore. The greatest example of a question you should ask your nurse if you're at the hospital is when the baby comes out, maybe they'll delay cord clamping. They should. And then eventually they'll cut the cord and they'll take the baby to the warmer. That's changing. It's good that it's changing. But there are many hospitals where they still do that. And you ask the nurse, why are you doing that? And the answer is, we have to check the baby out. It's like, well, why do you have to be over there to check the baby out? Well, it's warmer. Well, my chest is warm. My baby could still be connected to its umbilical cord. Why don't you check the baby out right here? And they don't really have a reason why they're doing that. They just do it. So, let's see, where was I? Do you recall?
You were explaining. Pardon?
Yeah.
Yeah, you were explaining what happens. You were going through all of the list of interventions that happens with twins at a hospital.
So, but in reality, if you make it to term, laboring with a twin baby, thank you. My brain does this sometimes because I have so much in there. If the first baby is in a proper position, and that can include breech delivery. Now, again, the medicalized birth model fears breech delivery. They're going to think the baby's heads are going to get stuck on each other and stuff like that. And there are remedies for that. It's extremely rare when that happens. The world literature doesn't support it. It does show anecdotal cases of it happening. I even had in a case like that. I wrote a case report. But if that first twin is in a longitudinal lie, then you can deliver vaginally at home. And the second, and it's just like having a baby and then having another baby. And you just need someone skilled there because occasionally little baby bees can be little rascals and they can turn sideways or they can turn, or their cord can fall out or whatever else. And in a singleton pregnancy at 6 centimeters, if the cord falls out, that's an emergency. In a second twin, after the first twin's already out, if the cord falls out, it's not an emergency. Because you can check the baby. If the baby's in the proper position, she can push it out or you can reach up and pull it out. Sounds, I'm making it sound very casual. It's obviously very intense and people need to be trained for that, but it is not hard to do if you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
The problem is that in my profession, they're not teaching young doctors to do that anymore. And they're immediately going to the scalpel. And it's sad. Up to 20% of women who deliver their first twin vaginally will have a second twin delivered by cesarean section, which is almost never indicated. It's because the doctor who's delivering the twin doesn't understand or doesn't know breech extraction or internal pedalic version or doesn't know it. And those doctors shouldn't be taking care of twins. But they are. If a doctor isn't comfortable with a breech baby, and we know that over 50% of twins will have at least one of the twins being breech, 53% in the world literature, then that doctor, when he finds out you have twins at 10 weeks pregnant, should say something like this: "Wow, Brittany, congratulations. That's so exciting. I'm not your guy. I don't know how to do breech delivery and more than that. So I'm going to refer you to somebody who does." But that's not what they do. They start planting these seeds of doubt to funnel you down the path toward the idea that twins are better off delivered by cesarean. And they're delivered by a certain age. If they're mono-di twins, they should be delivered at 37 weeks. If they go past it, the stillbirth rate's too high. 38 weeks for di twins. The stillbirth rate's too high. You ask them, well, what is the actual stillbirth rate, doctor? I can almost guarantee you they don't know. They've just been taught that it's higher. But higher chance does not mean high risk. That make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it does. It does make sense. Is there, you might have said it, but is there a higher risk of C-section for twins in general, not just for one of the babies of the twins?
Yes.
Yes.
It's an easy question. Yeah. The C-section rate for twins is going to be higher even in with people who know what they're doing. And there's some institutions where the C-section rate for twins is like 90%. They'll just section. If you got a twins, they're going to be sectioned. And that's wrong. But there are more problems with twin pregnancies. There's no question about it. The biggest problems with twin pregnancies are things that happen antepartum. If you have mono-di twins, you can have something called twin-twin transfusion syndrome. It occurs in about 15% of mono-di twins. You can have prematurity and premature rupture of membranes. Preterm labor is one of the bigger risk factors for twins. But if you make it to term, then a labor is just a labor.
Yeah.
And again, the hospital is so wound up with anxiety that it's a very difficult place to give birth. Because if we go back to the basics, and if you go back to how mammals give birth, the first thing they do is they go to a quiet place, and they go by themselves. And as my colleague Sarah Buckley gets credit for saying, mammals like it when they're safe, quiet, and unobserved. And the hospital is the antithesis of feeling safe, quiet, and unobserved. You may feel safer in the hospital, but safety is relative. But when you can't be undisturbed in a hospital, and it's not going to be quiet in a hospital. It's just not the way the system is designed. And when mammals in the wild are interrupted, little kids run into the room where the cat's laboring, or a predator approaches out in nature. The mammal will put out hormones like adrenaline, which will stop their contractions. The mammal will get up and run away, and only when it feels safe will it go back into labor. In this way, nature ensures the best chance of survival of the next generation. That is how nature works. We are no different than that. Yet we take women from the place where they might feel safest in their life, which is their own bedroom and bathroom and kitchen, and we make them get in a car and drive to a hospital and answer all kinds of silly questions at the triage area, all while having contractions 5 minutes apart. And here, sign some documents. On here, go in the bathroom, pee in a cup, change into a hospital gown, get in bed, get monitors put on you, get an IV stuck in your arm, have some blood drawn from your arm, get asked more questions by a second person answering the same questions you were asked half an hour earlier. And you wonder why labors become dysfunctional at the hospital. And then they end up, this is your cascade of interventions, because now your labor has petered out because you're a mammal. And they think, well, you're not moving fast enough, because they've done an unnecessary vaginal exam and they find you're 3 centimeters. But you're already here and you're 40 weeks and 2 days, so you're already overdue, which you're not. But they call it overdue. And they say, you're here, but you might as well get things going. And so they offer to rupture your membranes or start Pitocin. And then the contractions come on and you can't really move because they want you to be monitored. So they You can't deal with the discomfort like you normally would. So you ask for an epidural, and the epidural lowers your blood pressure, and baby doesn't like that very much. And then you get hyperstimulated from the Pitocin. The baby's heart rate begins to change. And the doctors what they're seeing on the monitor makes the doctors nervous, and they're coming in the room constantly. And eventually they think you should have a C-section, and you succumb to it because you can't take it anymore. And if anybody as I say these things, people listening should feel the anxiety in themselves building, because that's what I'm intending to do, because that's exactly what's happening to the woman and her partner in the hospital setting.
Yeah, and that's what it feels like. It's exactly what it feels like 10 times that. The anxiety and the stress, and then you get so fed up, and you're like, okay, I might as well do it. Let's just get it over with, right? Because you've just been badgered down in so many different ways, and your hormones are through the roof.
Yeah, you're coerced, you're bullied, you're badgered into submission. Yeah. Right. This is why, if you are healthy, I don't know if you've seen Business of Being Born. So it's a documentary that Abby Epstein and Ricky Lake made years ago. It seems to be like it's like the Bible of documentaries for pregnancy. And Marsden Wagner, may he rest in peace, says, he gives a little monologue, and then he says at the end, if you want to have the birth that you desire, stay the hell out of the hospital. And he means it. And this, again, is for most women. The dilemma is, of course, is that we can't close hospitals for pregnancy because we need them. They do great work. But they're only needed for a small percentage. And yet, if they only have a small percentage of pregnant women, they financially can't stay open, which is a whole dilemma that needs to be addressed. We need to figure out a way to keep hospitals open for those that need it, but let women who want to choose to deliver at a birth center or at home have free reign to do that, and stop state legislatures from listening to lobbyists and limiting choices. We advocate in our twin paper that we stop contraindicating these choices. We contraindicate the contraindications to these choices. We take away the restrictions like the 37-week rule or the 42-week rule, or midwives can't do breeches. Well, if midwives can't do breeches and doctors won't do breeches, what's a woman going to do? Some of them are going to free birth. Is that safer?
Yeah.
Is it about safety, really? I don't really think it is about safety. They use safety as a canard to push their ideas on you. There's a French philosopher, I quote him all the time on these podcasts. His name's Albert Camus, Camus. Maybe people have heard of him. Mm-hmm. Very simple statement. The welfare of humanity is always the alibi of tyrants. And if you think about that, any totalitarian government in history has always said they're doing it for your own benefit. They're doing it for the benefit of their citizens or whatever else, when they're really not. And it's the same thing that's going on here, is using safety as a weapon to frighten you into doing what they want you to do is completely unethical. It's done all the time. We all have a bias, Brittany, and at least in my case, I have a very strong bias, but I let people know from the get-go that I have a bias. My colleagues in the hospital think that they're right, and they think that anybody who doesn't think like them are wrong. And that's just ignorant. It's obtuse, because all you have to do is look at the world literature on home birth, and you'll see that for equal cohorts of women, the women do much better at home than they do in the hospital. There isn't enough data on twins and breeches, which is why Rixa and I put our papers out there to just have it in the world. Again, our papers are too small, but it just maybe inspires somebody down the road to do a bigger study, to take a look and see. But I can tell you from personal experience, having worked in both worlds, that there is no comparison. Home birth or birth center birth is the way to go for most women, because it's not just the destination that matters. The journey is really what's important. And every woman loves her baby, but a large percentage of women don't love the process of way which the baby came into their arms. They're not happy about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Which is very sad.
We're working on it.
Reality.
Yeah, we're working on it.
Yeah.
And people are waking up. The whole MAHA movement in my country is spreading. Obviously, it's spreading worldwide about getting healthier foods and cleaning the air and water and looking at the toxins and vaccines and pesticides and other things like that. We need to do stuff because all you have to do as I said at the very beginning of the podcast, is look at outcomes. Our children are sicker than they've ever been. Our mothers are unhappier than they've ever been. Well, I don't know that that's the case, but I'm just saying that reports of birth trauma are higher than they've ever been.
Right.
Women expressing that they had terrible experiences. They just had hearings in England and Australia and New Zealand where women were allowed to come up to the microphone at a government hearing and express themselves. And it was, talk about hearing the stories of these women. They got a voice finally to tell how they felt they were bullied and that, they're traumatized. They were absolutely traumatized by experience. This is supposed to be the most glorious event in your life. And you want to be able to look back on it and think of a really, really happy day.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. One final word. What do you want all the women listening to remember?
Pregnancy is not a disease. Pregnancy is a normal function of your body that occasionally goes awry. But midwives are the guardians of normal birth. The traditional midwives. Now we have to be careful about using that word now because the medicalized world is taking over the midwifery schools and things like that too. You have to be really careful. Some midwives are coming out being very medical. But midwifery looks at pregnancy as a normal function of your body. They trust nature, and they understand that they're accepting of uncertainty. The obstetric model sees pregnancy as an illness. The American College of OBGYN has a statement in one of their guidelines on influenza and pregnancy that starts out like this: pregnancy itself is a high-risk condition. So if that's how the prism by which they see pregnancy, then you can understand why, if pregnancy itself is a high-risk condition, that everything that they do follows, because they treat it like that. But it isn't itself a high-risk condition. It can become one, and then you need an expert for that. But you don't need an obstetrician to deliver a baby. You need an obstetrician who are experts in surgical and problem birth, and they're good at that. Problem is they see everything like that. And obstetricians don't like nature's chaos. So they'll instill their own form of chaos because they're comfortable with that. I'll give you an example of that. This gets into the whole idea of what they consider to be high risk, basically. And if the ACOG is to be followed, then all pregnancies are high risk, which makes high risk a meaningless term. And I would argue that high risk is a meaningless term. It's not a number. High risk, I'll summarize, is something that makes the obstetricians uncomfortable. What are some examples of that? These are real simple ones. Which is riskier? Being over 35 or having your labor induced because you're over 35? And the answer is having your labor induced is riskier than being over 35. Yet what's labeled high risk is being over 35. What's riskier? Having a breech vaginal delivery or having a C-section for that first baby breech and wanting 3 more kids?
Wow.
Okay. They label breech as being high risk. So their solution to that is to do a C-section that puts all those future babies at greater risk than the first baby was in the first place. It's stage 1 thinking. It's like this: we're doing this without thinking about the downstream consequences. Stage 1 thinkers fail to ask the follow-up question to what they're doing, which is, well, if we do this, then what happens? They don't ask. And usually stage 1 thinking is motivated by money. Pretty much always you can find the reason that something was done and without study or anything else is because somebody made money from it. And that's a detriment. So what women need to do is they need to make this the most important thing in their life. And as I said at the beginning, before you get pregnant, You investigate your community, find out what's available in your community. Maybe you don't have a great choices in your community, and so you're going to get your prenatal care in another town. You might do it virtually for part of the time and then have somebody locally, and you might plan something different. Make a plan. Do something. Make it fun. And include your partner. We haven't spoken much about partners in this. Generally, they're men. And men feel very awkward often when they don't know how to help their woman. And they feel like a third wheel. And the hospital system perpetuates that. The man is pushed off to the side, whereas the midwifery model includes them more. We loved when, our visits were an hour long, our prenatal visits in the midwifery model, and we loved when the husbands could come. We sometimes made our hours different so that we could catch them at their lunch hour or after work so the husbands could come. Because if the husband and wife do it together, then it strengthens the bond.
Yeah.
And if the husband's involved in the birth of their child, like they get to catch the baby, I do believe, and again, I don't know that there's scientific evidence of this. I don't think you always need science. You don't need a study to tell you it's safer to cross the street when the light is green than when it's red. They've probably done studies like that, but I think that's pretty much commonsensical. But when a father catches his own baby, there's such a much stronger bond than when he's pushed off to the side as a third wheel, in which they can happen in many hospital settings. Again, many American and Canadian hospitals are getting better at this. Why it's taken this long? It tells you that the people running the system were never really thinking about what they were doing. But in many countries in the world, things are terrible with obstetrics.
Yeah.
And, we're not going to change it overnight. But we know that the outcomes are better when women choose midwifery model. And with a trusted midwife who can recognize when things require obstetrical intervention, that's the way to go. And I would say that as an obstetrician, I would rather see myself unemployed because all the patients are going to midwives. I think that would be. But clearly, right now in your country, in my country, we don't have enough midwives to do this. So the system needs to change, and it's the education system. And I really think I'd like to see in your schools, in our schools, in our middle schools, and our high schools, I'd like to see the normalcy of pregnancy and birth be taught as part of a health class so that we get them before they get indoctrinated into the fear-based world of their obstetrician at that first prenatal visit. We need to teach them what's normal. Because they don't know. They get their information from TikTok. No, they do. And and a lot of TikTok is some influencer talking about her birth. We have one of our most watched reels ever on our podcast was when we dissected a conversation that Joe Rogan had with some actress, where they said all kinds of misinformation about home birth on it. And so Bliss and I, it was one of the few podcasts where we actually took clips of the podcast and put them. We don't have the tech to normally do that, but we felt, because Joe Rogan is such a following, that we felt that was so important to do.
Wow.
Yeah,
I gotta go watch.
But that's where it comes from, and we need to catch young people so that we can change the culture. By changing the culture, we will change the face of birth, and we will get better outcomes.
I love this. Yeah, I agree. Dr. Stu, if people want to work with you, listen to your podcast, or plug into any of the resources that you have, where can they do that and how can they find you?
Well, pretty much everything I have is Birthing Instincts. So my website is Birthing Instincts, www.birthing.instincts. My Instagram is Birthing Instincts. My podcast is Birthing Instincts. Those are the three main ways to reach me. I have contact ways through my website via email. You can reach out to me. I do offer a virtual meeting system. If you have questions, you can do that. If you're a practitioner, you can sign up for that. They're paid. There are different tiers. I have an annual membership for birth workers. and to sign up, and it's not very expensive. It's like $100 a month, and they can reach out to me non-emergently for any question. They have to give a second opinion. They get an ultrasound report from an MFM saying this is this and that is that, and so they can send it to me and say, "What do you think?" And I can give them a different opinion. I can meet with their clients, that sort of thing. I offer that, and then of course my real passion is to teach breech and twin skills. I have something I call Reteach Breech. I go around the world several months a year, and I do these 2-day seminars, which are packed with sort of me talking and the wisdom that I have gathered over the years from many of the midwives that and some of the mentors that have trained me, and I walk on their coattails with such respect. And then we do hands-on training with Sophie and her mom simulators. They're really good simulators, and we practice breech delivery, we practice breech extraction, we practice internal pedalic version. We teach the skills that make our professions unique. And even for practitioners who wouldn't say that they say their system, or they even don't want to do breech delivery, every now and then you're going to encounter one. You're going to encounter a woman who comes in with the butt sticking out of the vagina, and you're going to panic, and you're not going to know what to do. And you could have that baby out in 15 seconds if you knew what to do. But what hospitals often do, Brittany, is horrendous. They will take that woman they'll push her legs together, they'll take her up to labor and delivery, they'll give her general anesthesia, they'll push the baby back up inside, they'll do an emergency crash C-section, and they'll pull the baby out breech from the abdomen instead of letting it come out from the vagina, because they're so fixated on the idea, the head's going to get stuck. Well, it's not going to get stuck if you know what you're doing. And even if you don't know what you're doing, most babies, if a woman is upright on all fours, the baby will rotate, do its cardinal movements, gravity will kick in, and the baby will flop onto the floor before you can get the towel underneath it. All right, it's that fast. And for that, they will section these women. If women want to know more about breech birth, there's a short documentary called Heads Up, The Disappearing Art of Breech Delivery. You can search that. It's about 35 minutes long. It tells the story of 6 women, and there are 3 physicians on there that we are interviewed, and we talk, and it gives a really good insight as to why things are the way they are about breech, and it tells the story, and some of them are tragic, and some of them are extremely uplifting, and it actually shows a breech birth in the old-fashioned way with a woman on her back, because that's the way I was doing them back in 2011. But now it should be upright, and again, I've got off the that's how people can reach me. And I have such a passion for this. I've seen the differences in the 2 models. I did things when I was a young physician that I sort of mock or laugh at now. I can't be mad at myself because it's all I knew.
Yeah.
And we didn't have resources like we have out now. I'm talking about 1986, 87, 88. We didn't have cell phones then. We had beepers. We had to go find payphones back then. So I can't be mad, but I can be mad at people now who pretend that they don't know that this stuff exists, that these options exist. And that's why I get upset with my colleagues who don't stand up. I understand you're under a lot of pressure. Your salary may be depending on it, but how do you keep your job and sell your soul?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How do you sleep at night?
They don't, actually. They're birth workers. They don't sleep at night. Right. Oh God, it's great meeting. It's really great meeting you. Thank you for the opportunity to just monologue. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, this has been great. And you're just a wealth of knowledge, and I just appreciate your time. This is great. And maybe when I get pregnant again, I will reach out to you. We'll see what happens. Do you ever actually do consultations with clients virtually, or is it only for practitioners?
No. I do consultations with clients. Nice. Telemedicine is a strange thing. So, technically they're meetings with clients. So, you have to have these sort of disclaimers. But I tend to have very strong opinions, and I probably do 2 or 3 of these a day, where people will write to me. Some will choose to consult with me. Some will choose not to. Depends on finances and things like that. It's not very expensive to do it, but some people just don't want to do it. But I think that I try to answer every email I get, even if it's a paragraph. I spend a lot of time doing that. I'm not in this to make money. I mean, I have to make a living anymore because I am retired from birthing. So I do it because it really matters to me that people are given options, because there's so much gaslighting going on to the, as you said earlier.
Yeah.
It's horrible. So I'm open to talking to people. If families decide, or women decide, that what they're hearing from their doctor just doesn't hit the common sense-o-meter right, their spidey sense is up, they can reach out and get a second opinion. And if I can offer them a second opinion, I will. And if I think that it's not something I can help them with, then I will be honest about that and say, no, I would need to have hands-on for that, or I need to have an ultrasound for that, or I need to do these things. I can't really tell you, but I can give you my opinion based on what you're telling me, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Last year when I DM'd you, I was surprised that you answered me. Like, I was like, oh, he's probably not going to answer me. And because I wrote you like my whole situation, and you gave me your like 2 cents, and it was helpful. But you actually do what you're saying. Like, you read everything, you respond to all the messages. And it actually makes a difference to have access to somebody like you.
Thank you. If all I can do is point you in another direction, or give you something to think about, or give you questions to go back to your practitioner to ask, and not to be antagonistic to him or her, but to just ask the question and say, listen, I'm having this legitimate question. Can I ask you a question? And if they don't give you the time of day, if they sort of roll their eyes, these are red flags. We did a podcast with the Down to Birth people. I don't know if you know the Down to Birth podcast, but we did a podcast on red flags, and it was one of my favorites, because Trish and Cynthia are so good at pointing these things out. But one of them is do they make eye contact with you, or are they just busy typing into their electronic medical record system while they're talking to you? And do you have time to have a question and to ask a question? And ultimately, the key is, most women, when they go to their OB visit, they're slightly nervous. So you ask the final question: when you left your OB's office, did you feel better or worse? And if you feel worse, wake up. Don't go back. Look for other alternatives. That's not the point. You're the consumer. They're providing you a service. You don't have to do that. The restaurant kept giving you bad tasting lasagna. You wouldn't keep going back for the lasagna. You go someplace else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
No, that's brilliant. Yeah. Yeah. I've been there. So I got it. Yeah. And it's also just like teaching women to like tap back into their intuition and like how much power they actually hold, versus like, hey, here's the doctor, you decide everything, and I'm just going to, outsource this to you.
You're designed to give birth by yourself. Culturally, we've gone away from that. And yes, it can be unsafe in certain circumstances. But if the world were to come to a shutdown or a close, and you lived in Boontown, Wyoming, and you didn't have any access to anything, and you went into labor, likelihood is that everything would be fine. Your body would know exactly what to do. Push the baby out, placenta would come out, your uterus would contract down, your baby would get on the breast, you'd be fine. And again, I know that confounds the senses in 2025, that idea, but that's what you're designed to do. Nature didn't design mammals to have veterinarians out in the wild helping the deer have her baby, or that sort of thing. So I know that the naysayers would say, yeah, would deer die in labor and stuff like that? Yeah, they do. Right. But most of the time they don't.
Yeah.
And, they don't have chronic illness rates in their does. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. I don't think they have massive depression in the moms either.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And look what we're doing.
Wow.
We need to stop. We need to just take a deep breath, sit back, and look at this from a whole other perspective, that this is a normal function, and hire people that are like-minded like you. And the first place to start is with your local traditional midwives. And we need to reinforce them that we need them, and we need to prevent the midwifery schools from being taken over by the organizations. All the 3 and 4 letter organizations have become just sort of arms of big pharma and big money, big tech, and they no longer advocate for the individual. The American College of OBGYN does not advocate for pregnant women. They advocate for the American College of OBGYN. The American Academy of Pediatrics, they're so far off the deep end, I don't even know what to say about them anymore. They're still promoting, ACOG and AAP are still promoting the COVID vaccine for pregnant women and for newborns. I mean, for babies. Anybody that's doing that is not something you should trust. And once you lose the trust of, it's almost impossible to get it back. I don't know who the leaders of these organizations think they are. I think they just live in a bubble. And they never really talk to people like you and me.
Yeah.
They don't. I mean, I know that, again, if you want to cut this out, you can, but I think back to the early days of COVID, and I think, wouldn't it have been nice if President Trump had said to Anthony Fauci and Deborah Birx, hey, Tony, I got 2 hours of primetime television on Tuesday. You and Deborah are coming on, and I'm bringing on Peter McCullough and Jay Bhattacharya. And you guys are going to have a conversation about the origins of COVID and alternative treatments and, repurposed drugs like hydroxychloroquine, so the nation can witness the conversation. Wouldn't that have been brilliant? And wouldn't that have been better for the American people and the Canadian people and the European people if you would have had these people on telly having an honest debate face to face where they can't call each other, they can't get away with calling each other names and just saying, oh, you're an anti-vaxxer. You can't do that when you're faced, but they never do those sorts of things. These people in power will never put themselves, they'll never defend their position against somebody who disagrees with them. And that just tells you something. I would go on in a heartbeat and debate somebody from ACOG about ACOG's policies.
Wow,
and I would bet you in 80% of the time, Brittany, we would find agreement. We would probably, because those are the things we don't argue about. But it's the big things. I would just ask somebody from ACOG. He says, so all these things that you're doing, how are the outcomes? How have we done with the outcomes over the last 20 years? And I would love to hear what they have to say. Yeah. Oh, the women are fatter. Oh, the women are older. Okay, they're going to deflect it to the women as opposed to their system. They can't take responsibility for it because there's too much cognitive dissonance there. It's too painful for them to realize that what we've been doing all our careers is not working. Yes, we've saved some people, but how many have we harmed in the process? The human nature doesn't allow you to look at yourself like that. More than half of all C-sections are probably unnecessary. Who's doing them?
Right.
Who's doing the unnecessary C-section? No doctor goes home at night and says to their spouse, hey, honey, guess what I did today? I did 2 unnecessary C-sections. All right? They don't. So no doctor does unnecessary C-sections, yet half of C-sections are unnecessary. How do I say that? Because the C-section rate used to be 5%. The World Health Organization, not an organization I have much respect for, they think that in Western countries, the C-section rate should be 10 to 15%. So if it's 30% or higher, then at least half of them are being done are unnecessary. Yet not a peep. Not a peep from the insurance companies, which are paying for unnecessary C-sections. If we had hundreds of thousands of unnecessary knee surgeries every year, insurance companies would be pissed about that. So would the government. So would ethics people. But we have hundreds of thousands of unnecessary C-sections every year. I don't hear anything. I have nobody complaining.
Yeah.
You have this like, oh God, I'm just overwhelmed look on your face.
No, it's just like, it's more just like sad when I'm someone who had a C-section. And so I know what it feels like. I know it's like, I know
I'm
all
sorry,
of it.
You're right.
And no, not to say like what you're saying isn't true or anything like that. It's just like, was my C-section unnecessary? And how many of my friends who's had C-sections, is it unnecessary, right? It's like the real reality that I live in. It's not just some statistic that's like out there and doesn't actually affect people. It's like affecting so many of my friends right now. So it's very, very real to like hear this data currently.
By the way, I'm humbled by the fact that you just said that, because you're right. I'm spouting data and not real life experience. Well, some of it, but not the personal experience. And yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to imply that your C-section was unnecessary, but I think that you get the impression that it may very well have been.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. And then it's just hard because then post C-section, what are you even supposed to do with that information?
Educate future generations so that your daughters don't have to deal with this sort of thing. That's all that we can do. We can't go back in time and change anything. But we can try to make changes for the future so that our daughters and our granddaughters and their spouses do not have to experience these sorts of things. There will always be trauma. There will always be tragedy in birth, in life in general. People go fly someplace to visit somebody and the plane crashes, and it's a tragedy. Doesn't mean you stop all flights. Doesn't mean you do that. You try to make things safer. In this particular thing, the people that are causing the problem are the ones being asked to solve the problem. That is insanity. That's the inmates running the asylum. That's like asking Barney Frank and Chris Dodd, the people that were responsible for the banking crash of 2008, where then their policies led to that. And who did the government put in charge of the recovery? Chris.
Yeah. Same people.
Barney Frank and Chris Dodd. Same two guys. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the same thing here. We can't expect the American College of OBGYN to be the ones, or the Royal College, even in Canada. We can't. I think it's a Society of OBGYN of Canada, I think is what yours is. We can't expect them to be the ones that solve the problem. And they should have really very little or no role. I stated this publicly at a forum in DC a few weeks ago when I got to speak at a roundtable. I overtly said that ACOG should have no role in the future of planning for how we deal with obstetrics, because they're the ones that have gotten us into this mess.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that. And again, I would love to sit on the stage with the president of ACOG, Stephen Fleischman, and have a conversation like that. I'm not looking for trouble. I'm looking to, and I'm not trying to strut mine's bigger than yours. I am just basically saying that this is what people need to hear. You need to explain yourself to an audience that isn't sycophantic.
Yeah. I think it's education, and that's what this podcast is for. And that's what your podcast and all your platforms are for as well, is like, you might not get that opportunity, but hey, you can hop on a mic and produce content for free or free access to people so that they can at least find it online. And
you're doing that. And, I listened to several of your podcasts before, and it's great. I mean, the fact that you are doing what you're doing is and again, because you go through all different forms of health. This is not your focus. This is my focus. So I'm I'm humbled and honored to have been asked to be a guest on your podcast. And I'll end it there because you know what? I'll just come up with another thought and off I'll go on another tangent. This is just how my mind works. And I'm on vacation. I'm in California visiting my family. We had a baby shower yesterday for my daughter-in-law who's 30 weeks pregnant, and I'm going to visit some friends and stuff. I moved away from LA 3 years ago, and I'm going to spend the week seeing some of my old midwife friends and other friends here. That's great. So I feel I'm very relaxed. Yeah. Good.
Well, thank you for taking your time on your vacation to come on the show. You didn't have to do that, and we definitely appreciate it.
My whole life is a vacation now. Seriously, okay. I love teaching, and I love doing these as much as I love swimming and biking, and because I feel like I'm doing something good. Yeah. I mean, obviously, there's a selfish benefit to being out there and doing something that I truly believe in. We're very lucky to have this role as podcasters and as passionate people, that we found something that we can truly believe and we truly support. Again, so thank you for this opportunity to speak to your audience.